John and Jane Does, unsolved murders, and missing persons. Thus far, that has been the primary focus of MysteriousWV, to help shed light on these foundering cases and maybe, just maybe, help law enforcement to bring them to a successful conclusion. With our style and methodology now firmly established, we felt that the time was right to extend our documentation into other areas. And with Halloween fast approaching, we simply could not resist the temptation to present to you our first video feature dealing with the paranormal. Just one of the many things that help to make the great state of West Virginia mysterious. Our first foray into the world of the paranormal takes us back to rural Greenbrier County just before the turn of the 20th century, a time when the horrors of the Civil War had finally faded, only to be replaced by a diabolical crime and a tale of a ghostly encounter so utterly fantastic that it found its way not only into the pages of the local and national newspapers, but into the law books as well.
Greenbrier County, West Virginia, lies in the southeastern section of the state, directly astride the spine of the great Appalachian Mountains. Then, as today, it was a mostly pastoral locale, destined to be only lightly scarred by the mad rush for coal which was only just beginning to grip the nation. It was one of those idyllic settings that one tends to associate more with a Norman Rockwell painting than a tale of murder and betrayal. However, in January of 1897, the blissfulness of these tranquil surroundings was to be shattered, and within the span of only 6 months, the deeply held beliefs of many of its most pious inhabitants would be shaken to their very foundations. A little less than a year before this great upheaval, a man by the name of Erasmus Stribling Shue, an itinerant blacksmith by trade, arrived in the county. Shue came from the Droop Mountains section of neighboring Pocahontas County. He stated to many of the locals that he hoped to start his life anew in Greenbrier County. In short order, Shue found work as a blacksmith at the shop of James Crookshanks, and moved into a 2-story frame home formerly occupied by the late William M. Livesey. Although he was considered friendly and hard-working, widespread rumors about Shue's past managed to follow him across the county line. The details have been fuzzied by the passage of time, but Shue had apparently been married twice before his arrival in Greenbrier County. One account, given in the 1960s, states that his 2 previous wives had died under circumstances that were not exactly commonplace. One in a fall from a haystack, and the other having been struck by a falling brick from a chimney that Shue himself was in the process of repairing. It was also rumored that Shue had once served time in prison for stealing a horse, at the time the equivalent of grand theft auto. However, even such unsavory gossip was not enough to dissuade the feelings of an attractive 22-year-old girl named Zona Hester. Hester lived with her mother, Mary Hester, in or near the town of Crawley, about 14 miles away from Shue's residence in Livesey Mill. At the time, Zona Hester's own reputation had also been the subject of vicious local gossip. Sometime in 1895, Zona Hester reportedly fathered a child out of wedlock, and no marriage appeared to be imminent. No one quite knows why Zona was drawn so powerfully to Shue. Genuine affection? Or perhaps it was a combination of empathy, shame, and the fear of possibly being forever ostracized from the community that drove Zona to the arms of Shue. Whatever the motivation or reasons, Hester and Shue were married in Greenbrier County in October of 1896. Zona's mother, Mary, was not shy in expressing her deeply felt disapproval of the match. It would not take long for her misgivings to appear justified. Not long after Christmas, Zona Shue fell mysteriously ill. Dr. George Knapp, whose name was to become inexorably linked to the entire affair, was called. Knapp examined Zona on several occasions, but was unable to conclusively diagnose her affliction. As the weeks went by, Zona's condition did not improve and seemed to grow steadily worse. Some speculated that Zona was again with child. Local residents took note that Shue seemed to willingly take on the role of a doting husband and did what he could to care for his wife, or so it seemed. On the morning of January 22, 1897, Shue, who had come to be known locally as Trout, left home as usual for his nearby blacksmith shop. Departing from his normal routine, Trout stopped at the nearby home of Martha Jones, known in the community as Aunt Martha. Trout reportedly told Jones that Zona was under the weather that morning and asked if her son Andrew could possibly collect the eggs at his home and then help Zona with some chores. Martha Jones agreed, but for reasons that remain unknown, Andrew Jones did not go directly to the Shue residence. Shue reportedly returned to Jones' home on 3 additional occasions that morning, repeating his request that Andrew go to his home to assist his wife. Reports on this vary, but Andrew Jones apparently arrived at the Shue residence sometime between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. Receiving no answer to repeated knocks at the front door, Andrew Jones entered the Shue home and was met with a horrifying sight. Lying on the floor before him was the lifeless body of Zona Shue. According to Jones, Zona's body was positioned with her feet together, one arm at her side, the other lying across her stomach, and her head slightly tilted to one side. Andrew quickly fled and reported what he had found to both his mother as well as Trout Shue. Martha and Trout quickly ran to the Shue home, apparently arriving at virtually the same time. At some point around this time, Dr. Knapp was also sent for and arrived at the Shue home approximately 1 hour later. Upon his arrival, Dr. Knapp was dismayed to find that the body of Zona Shue had not only been moved from the spot where it was found, but had also been redressed and laid out as if already prepared for burial. This seemed quite odd to Knapp, as it was customary at the time for the remains of a deceased female to be prepped for viewing and burial by the female members of the community, and after any necessary inquest or autopsy had been completed. Setting aside his initial bewilderment, Dr. Knapp made some rudimentary attempts at resuscitation, but quickly ascertained that the situation was well beyond hope. The body was already cold and quite obviously lifeless. Knapp noted some slight discoloration on Zona Shue's right cheek and neck. However, when he began to loosen the tight, high collar to allow for a closer examination, Trout Shue protested and angrily demanded Knapp to stop. Perhaps intimidated by Shue's imposing nature, Dr. Knapp ceased his examination. Zona Shue's body was soon laid out in its casket in her home for viewing and visitation. Those who came to pay their respects later recalled that Trout Shue never left the head of his wife's casket and placed rolled-up sections of cloth on either side of her head in a manner that he stated would have been comfortable for her. Following the wake, Zona Shue's remains were transported over Sewell Mountain to Crawley. Zona Hester Shue was laid to rest in what was then the Soul Chapel Cemetery. Dr. Knapp initially attributed her death to heart failure, although when the official entry was made in the county death register, the cause of death had been changed to childbirth. For most, this seemed to be the sad end to a pitiful affair. No one could have possibly known that it was merely the conclusion of Act 1 in what would soon unfold into the most bizarre 3-act play the young state of West Virginia had yet witnessed. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Hester, refused to accept the official cause of death. Having never trusted Trout Shue, she felt that something was just not right with the series of events leading to her daughter's demise. In particular, she wondered why Shue had been so quick to dress and prepare Zona's body for burial, and why so much attention had been paid to comforting her head. In addition to this, Hester, with Trout Shue's blessings, had removed a white sheet from Zona's coffin prior to her internment. Days later, she noted that the garment was giving off a foul-smelling odor. When placed into a wash basin, the water in the basin inexplicably turned red, and the sheet faded to a shade of pink, which then seemed to refuse any further attempts at cleansing. Having little else to go on but her own suspicions and intuition, Mary Jane Hester did what came natural to her and turned to prayer. For nearly 4 weeks, it seemed as though no one in either heaven, hell, or the here and now was listening. Then, one night in February, events reportedly took an abrupt turn to the supernatural. Mary Jane Hester stated that she was roused from her sleep by a rustling sound in her bedroom. When she opened her eyes, she reportedly saw the ethereal form of her deceased daughter slowly roaming about the room. Mary attempted to touch the apparition, at which point it disappeared. Undeterred, Mary Jane again turned to prayer, pleading for an opportunity to speak with her daughter and hopefully learn the truth of her passing. According to official Greenbrier County documents, her prayers were rewarded beyond her wildest dreams. According to Mary Hester, the spirit of her daughter spoke to her on 4 separate occasions. Each time she revealed more about what had led to her death, or more accurately, her murder. Although many locals dismiss this as nothing more than the sad delusions of a grieving mother, some began having second thoughts. Mary Hester held fast to her story and was eventually able to convince her brother-in-law, Jonathan Hester, that she was speaking the truth. After comparing notes with Martha and Andrew Jones concerning the events on the morning of Zona's death, both Mary and Jonathan felt that they had enough evidence to make their case. The two traveled to the county seat of Lewisburg, where they related what they had learned to prosecuting attorney John Preston. Although initially skeptical, the sincerity and candor with which Mary Hester presented her case convinced Preston to at least look into the matter. Preston traveled to Meadow Bluff and first went to the local physician, Dr. Knapp. Mary Hester's version of events quickly started to gain credibility. Knapp opined that he had been prevented from completing a thorough examination of Zona's body by Trout Shue, and that there was every possibility that his official diagnosis was incorrect. After questioning several others in the Meadow Bluff district, John Preston came to the conclusion that there was, indeed, more to the case than first met the eye. To that end, he ordered the body of Zona Shue to be disinterred and a thorough autopsy performed. This sudden turn of events did not sit well with Trout Shue, who was alleged to have stated that he knew he would be arrested if the body was dug up, but that he could never be convicted. Words that would come back with a haunting of their own. On February 22, 1897, the casket containing the body of Zona Shue was removed from its earthly tomb and taken to the nearby Nichols Schoolhouse for the belated autopsy. Once inside, Dr. Knapp, along with Doctors Rupert and McClung and a 5-man jury, began their examination. Fortunately, the cold winter temperatures had kept the remains in a near-perfect state of preservation. During the post-mortem examination, it was discovered that Zona Shue's neck had been dislocated at a point between the first and second cerebral vertebrae, and the ligaments in the area had been torn and ruptured. Shue's windpipe had also been crushed from the front portion of the neck. Nothing else out of the ordinary was noted. Zona's body was returned to its resting place. Trout Shue was arrested and placed in the Greenbrier County Jail. The charge? First-degree murder. Even with his success in having Trout Shue arrested and imprisoned, prosecutor John Preston, along with attorney Henry Gilmer, knew that a conviction was far from certain. Although damning to his character, Shue's bragging about there being no way to convict him of Zona's murder was not without foundation. There was no known witnesses to the actual crime, no murder weapon, no fingerprints. All the evidence Preston had at his disposal, although powerful, was purely circumstantial. Shue was held in the small county jail cell near the courthouse while awaiting trial. He continued to brag to reporters and other visitors that he was confident he would be found innocent. Assigned to Shue's defense were Dr. William Parks Rucker and attorney James D. Gardner, the first African-American attorney to practice law in West Virginia Circuit Court. Greenbrier Circuit Court convened in Lewisburg on June 22, 1897. First case on the docket, the State of West Virginia versus Erasmus Stribling Shue. Although fully convinced of Mary Hester's veracity, John Preston was understandably leery about allowing her to take the stand. Even if the information Hester related to him and others did, in fact, come from a ghost or an apparition of some kind, it was still considered to be second-hand and therefore inadmissible. Preston also was understandably fearful that the nature of the story itself would damage Hester's credibility and quite possibly undermine an already uncertain case. Although the official trial documents have been lost to time, local as well as national newspapers recount that the first few days of the murder trial proceeded much like any other. Witnesses as well as experts were called, and the prosecution made the best possible case it could with the evidence at hand. The testimony of Dr. Knapp, as well as Martha and Andrew Jones, proved especially powerful. The sheet from Zona Shue's coffin, still stained an unmistakable shade of pink, was entered into evidence without objection. Once the prosecution rested, Shue's defense team swung into action. Much to Preston's deep dismay, Attorney Rucker took it upon himself to call Mary Jane Hester to the stand. Preston must have known instinctively what Rucker had in mind. A perfect opportunity to embarrass both Hester and the prosecution, and perhaps cast just enough shadow of doubt over the entire case to preclude a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. However, if this was indeed Rucker's plan of attack, it backfired in spectacular fashion. On the stand, Mary Hester stated that the apparition of Zona Shue returned 3 more times on successive nights following its first fleeting appearance. Hester, desperate to uncover the truth, pleaded with the ghostly figure of her daughter to tell her what had really happened. Although initially reluctant to speak of the matter, the Greenbrier ghost eventually loosened its otherworldly tongue and unburdened its troubled soul. Zona's spirit allegedly stated that on the night of January 21, 1897, Trout Shue had returned home in a foul mood. Although still ailing, Zona had dinner waiting for him when he arrived. According to Hester's account of the ethereal tale, Shue was furious to find that Zona had cooked no meat that day and went into a frenzy. His verbal and physical tirade ended in the very life being strangled right out of his helpless wife, and Mary Hester proceeded to recount the entire tale for the jury and the record. What follows is drawn from verbatim transcripts of Mary Hester's actual testimony as recorded by local reporters.
I've heard that you had some dream or vision which led to this post-mortem examination.
It was no dream. She came back and told me. He was mad that she didn't have no meat cooked for supper. But she said that she had plenty, and said that she had butter and apple butter, apples, and named over 2 or 3 kinds of jellies. And she says, "Don't you think that he was mad and just took down all my nice things and packed them away and just ruined them?" She told me something about that meat every other night she came. She came 4 times. The second night, she told me that her neck was squeezed off at the first joint, and it was just as she told me.
Now, Mrs. Heaster, this sad affair was very particularly impressed upon your mind, and there was not a moment during your waking hours that you did not dwell upon it?
Oh, no, sir, and there's not yet either.
And was this not a dream founded upon your distressed condition of mind?
No, sir, it was no dream, for I was as wide awake as I ever was.
Then, if not a dream or dreams, what do you call it?
Well, I prayed to the Lord that she might come back and tell me what had happened, and I prayed that she might come herself and tell on him.
Do you think that you actually saw her in flesh and blood?
Well, yes, sir, I do. I told them the very dress that she was killed in, and when she went to leave me, she turned her head completely around and looked at me like she wanted to know all about it. The last night she was there, she told me that she did everything she could do, and I'm satisfied that she did do all that, too.
Now, Mrs. Heaster, don't you know that these visions, as you term them or describe them, were nothing more or less than 4 dreams founded upon your distress?
No, I don't know it. The Lord sent her to me to tell it. I was the only friend that she knew she could tell and put any of her confidence in, and I was the nearest one to her.
Mrs. Heaster, are you positively sure that these are not 4 dreams?
Yes, sir, it was not a dream. I don't dream when I'm wide awake, to be sure, and I know I saw her right there with me.
Now, I would like, if I could, to get you to say that these were 4 dreams and not 4 visions or appearances of your daughter in flesh and blood.
I am not going to say that, for I am not going to lie.
Then you insist that she actually appeared in flesh and blood to you upon 4 different occasions?
Yes, sir.
Did she not have any other conversation with you other than upon the matter of her death?
I just wanted the particulars about her death, and I got them.
When she came, did you touch her?
Yes, sir. I got up on my elbows and reached out. She was just like she was when she left this world. And it was just after I went to bed, and I wanted her to come and talk to me. And she did.
Perhaps sensing that his attempt at discrediting the prosecution was going horribly awry, Rucker soon brought his questioning to an end. The damage, however, had been done. Although the testimony given by Mary Hester was unorthodox, to say the very least, the fact that it had been entered into evidence by the defense and not the prosecution left Judge J.M. McWhorter with little choice but to make reference to it in his final instructions to the jury. It took the jury just over 1 hour to reach its decision. The verdict? Guilty of murder in the first degree, but with a recommendation for mercy. This meant that Trout Shue was to spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. Apparently, many residents of Greenbrier County felt mercy was too good for Shue. 2 days later, as arrangements were made to move Shue to his final residence, an angry lynch mob formed in a nearby field. Only diplomatic action on the part of the county sheriff and quick thinking on the part of his deputy kept Shue from meeting the noose. After being hidden away in the nearby woods until things cooled down, Shue was taken from Lewisburg and transported to the West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville. Records state that he died there in 1900 and, like other indigent convicts, was buried in an unmarked grave in a potter's field. Today, the final resting place of Erasmus Shue has also been lost to memory. Opinion was divided as to whether or not Mary Hester actually was visited by the spirit of her murdered daughter. Many, knowing Hester's reputation as a God-fearing and honest woman, were willing to take her at her word. Others speculated that Hester's tale was nothing more than a brilliant ruse on her part to reignite interest in her daughter's death, a ruse played to absolute perfection. Despite public skepticism, Mary Jane Hester never wavered. She died in 1916, having never changed or recanted her version of events. Did Mary Jane Hester actually receive vital evidence from the apparition of Zona Shue? Did the spirit of Zona Shue return from its ethereal plane in order to help see justice through to its proper conclusion? Could Mary Hester simply have been dreaming, as the prosecution suggested? Could she have been hallucinating? Or is it possible that Mary Hester, convinced of Shue's guilt but left with no other recourse, concocted a scheme so fantastic and successful that it simply could not be ignored? It is very unlikely that we will ever receive a satisfactory answer to these questions. But who knows? Who knows?
In a post-conviction conversation, Trout Shue, perhaps in an attempt to clear his conscience, is reported to have told Judge McWhorter that the scenario put forth by Mary Hester during her testimony was all but 100% accurate. Books, newspapers, radio, television, and no fewer than 3 theatrical productions have helped to ensure that the events concerning Greenbrier County's unique slice of folklore have not faded with the passage of time. Today, the house where Zona Shue was murdered remains and was recently sold again, the buyer having full knowledge of the home's unique place in history. As far as we know, the spirit of Zona Shue has not been seen since 1897. Some parapsychologists have theorized that the spirits of those who die with either unfinished business or whose lives are taken from them are often bound to an unearthly existence until they are blessed with vindication. If true, then it seems likely that the spirit of Zona Shue has been able to move on. And it seems as equally unlikely that we will ever again chance to see or hear the Greenbrier ghost.